How's it going, everybody? It is Dark Ops here, and today I have a very good friend of mine to talk about what might possibly be the darkest storyline in the Walking Dead games, produced by Telltale. My friend here, Expert Fusion, and I are going to be talking about the final draft and the darker storyline for The Walking Dead Season 2. Why don't you lead us into it about the original storyline?
Yeah, of course. So there was a lot of prior versions of this game that were written all throughout time, and we know most about it because of things in the files and even some things that writers themselves have said, or just some of it is just rumors as well. But there's multiple different copies and multiple different drafts of this script that exist. And one of them in particular is a very dark version of the story, a lot darker than what we saw in season two. And some of that we're just going to talk about here, just, go over some of the different main things that were talked about and whether we enjoyed that or whether we would have liked that more than what we actually got.
About this is we're going to talk about the biggest differences that could have been from the original, some rumors that were going around with the original drafts, and what we ended up getting, and the leftovers. Because in the final episodes of The Walking Dead Season 2, you can see some leftover dialogue, even in game, that suggests a different copy was supposed to come out. So we'll just be talking about what could have happened and essentially what was supposed to happen. So, episode 5, which is the most infamous episode because of the different endings and what was supposed to be, is where we're going to be basically start off. So, if you want to talk about what was suggested to happen versus what we got.
Yeah, so episode 5, which of course was titled No Going Back, which has, a lot of people have some issues with it. I, for one, definitely have a lot of issues with this episode. I think it's probably one of the weaker episodes of the season, even if I still really enjoyed it. But there was very different plans for it, for sure. So first of all, the title of the episode was originally going to be Better to Sleep, which, I mean, the title itself implies some pretty dark things just from that alone. I mean, what does better to sleep mean? It means you're better off dead than whatever is in this episode. There was also music that on the menu screen when you were scrolling through each of the things, there was very different music used for episode 5 compared to what we actually got, and it is some of the most horrific music you will ever hear. Like, it's genuinely terrifying. Whereas what we actually got in the actual game itself, it's not that
Yeah.
creepy at all. It's just normal music. So when you listen to that, you could tell they were going for something really scary here, which is, The Walking Dead's obviously within the horror genre, but it's never been like that scary, at least in my opinion. But I feel
Yeah.
like there was definitely ways for them to get scarier. And by the looks of it, they were planning that for this season. And this episode, part of it was apparently supposed to have AJ dying, right?
Yeah, but AJ was apparently not going to make it either option. So from what I read and from what I've seen for the original script for episode 5, you were given either an option to leave AJ behind to die to the walkers, or you stay with AJ and you both freeze to death. So that's both options that are, there's no happy ending. That's far darker than what we got. And it also kind of shows in the picture of the
Yeah.
episode. You can kind of tell that somebody was supposed to freeze to death or die in some sort of manner. So
Hmm.
originally that was going to be how things ended up, and AJ wasn't going to make it, which has higher implications for season 3, if anything, because now Clementine has nothing, or she's even dead. So
Yeah.
that's like, The Walking Dead's never done something like that, I feel. Not even with Negan's introduction in the TV show, where he just whips out, Glenn and Abraham, like he just kills them, no problem. But here it's like Clementine, an 11-year-old, and AJ die. So that's something that really, I think they wanted to push towards a darker version of the Telltale games, but ultimately we didn't get that. But what are your? Do you think that that was a good call to keep AJ around and just scrap the ending?
Yeah, it depends because on one hand, I do think that dark direction would be really interesting, and I'm never opposed to stories taking a really dark direction. I mean, I love a lot of very dark pieces of fiction out there, just because it adds a lot more to the stakes, it adds a lot more weight to the characters. But at the same time, I do really enjoy the storyline we got in the final season with AJ. So I don't think in retrospect, I would have wanted that because then we wouldn't have gotten the final season with AJ. And I also think, you need something good for Clementine. You can't just have her having, the worst things possible, zero hope left for her. But on the other hand, I do think there are other things they could have done in this episode that could have still retained that horrific nature of like something like a baby dying. Maybe if there was, another child in the story of some sense, even Sarah was there, right? And Sarah does have she can die in two different ways, technically. And she could have gotten something more similar to that death. Maybe she could have been the one that froze to death in this episode instead of the way she died in episode 4. Why not bring her in episode 5 and have her get some sort of really gruesome death like that actually does add a lot more to Clementine's character than it did with as in episode 4.
Yeah, that was something I was wondering as well because Sarah's character was really not given justice. You're given the
Mhm.
option to train her to use a gun, but it amounts to absolutely nothing. So I
Yep.
wonder I wonder if that was going to be something as well, where if you trained her, she'd survive an extra episode, and then in episode 5 we'd see her either she'd be more part of the ending. Maybe she'd be the one we see when you scroll to episode 5. You see that person who's a complete skeleton. Maybe that'd be her instead. She'd be somehow in episode 5. I don't know how they'd accomplish it, but I think that Sarah definitely could have made it to episode 5. I just wonder what they wanted to do with her character because clearly they wanted her to be someone like kind of like Duck from season 1, where he didn't really
Mhm.
have all that much to do, but he's also just a child character, so you kind of just have to care for him. But Sarah's
Yep.
character is very much up in the air. They could have done anything with her, but she dies either way. So I don't think there's much she could go, but she definitely seems like she could have made a difference in episode 5.
Yeah. I agree completely.
So it's a wonder that from what I've read anyway, I just haven't seen much with her character. But do you think that she could have gone anywhere or would, like do anything of significance past her death in episode 4?
I think, I mean, as with any character like her, someone who's not a survivalist, not at that point yet, there always is an interesting story you can tell with her becoming like Clementine. Like she could have been basically Clementine 2.0, where she's now growing, becoming a survivalist. But I kind of actually like taking an opposite approach where she's Clementine if Clementine couldn't reach that point, basically Clementine without Lee. And that's why I'm okay with her getting killed. I just didn't like the way they handled it in season 4 because it's kind of brushed off. Like Clementine almost kind of just forgets it happened a minute after. Like that was my issue with it, regardless of which version she dies in. It's like it doesn't matter. It's she just doesn't. Clementine almost doesn't react to it. Doesn't really have any significant change. And I'm assuming that part of that was just due to just rushing the script and not really having enough time to fit in a large part of the story where Clementine is grieving over it, but I think you really needed that for that death to mean something. And maybe holding off that death for episode 5 could have done that because there's less characters in episode 5 anyways. So you could have spent more time with an actual emotional death with Sarah. And I think, a whole other episode with her, you will probably care for her more. Maybe she can even get closer to being a survivalist, but she just doesn't quite get there.
Yeah.
There's one thing that holds her back. And obviously she's not really like Clementine fully, so she wasn't going to be able to become Clementine regardless. So I think that could have been interesting.
For sure. I think she was wasted, especially when a lot of the characters they were all going to be killed regardless. I think most of the script was that everybody would die by that episode except for Clem,
Mhm.
AJ, and Kenny was rewritten a couple times, but I think he was going to survive to episode 5. Uh yeah, like there's gonna be 3, 4 characters left towards the end, so that's also something interesting to think about is that they were just kind of written with the purpose to die. And a lot of
Mhm.
people, I think, including myself, have the sentiment that they just kind of wrote in characters just for them to die. Like
Yeah.
what's his name? Pete in episode 1, he just exists for the purpose of dying. He doesn't make
Yep.
it past that point. Troy or whatever, we don't get a lot of him, even though he was supposed to be a lot more influential. He was supposed to be Carver from the original script, so
Mhm.
that's something to think about. And a little off topic, but I just want to bring this up. The writing team came out about season 2 in the behind the development scenes, and there was a rumor going around about Troy's character and how he would interact with Clementine. Those rumors are false. He was never supposed to really have a fight scene with her.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've seen that at all, but those
I
rumors are
think I know
not
what you're
true.
referring to. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say it because I don't want to get YouTube on me,
Hmm.
but if you know what I'm talking about, those rumors are not true. Those rumors are
Hmm.
never supposed to happen. But Troy was definitely gonna be a lot more of a Carver character, and it's a really interesting way to see how the characters were supposed to be completely different. But what are your thoughts on the how the story was supposed to be?
Well, so there's another thing involving well, first of all, for Carver's sake and the whole Troy thing, I think they actually made a good choice there by making Carver and not making Troy
Yeah,
into that, just because I mean, just based on even just the character design, I think Carver's a lot more threatening. And I don't know if what they had originally planned with the voice actor, but obviously the voice actor Michael Manson did a fantastic job with Carver. I
yeah.
think that's probably the best voice acting from the entire Telltale series. And like he's got such an iconic voice, and it works so well for that character. So Carver's probably my favorite thing about this season, actually, other than maybe Kenny.
I
But like
agree.
he's such a good villain, and even though he's not there for a long period of time, I think he doesn't overstay his welcome. He's there for just enough, and his end is obviously very satisfying. So that whole aspect of the season, like the way they did it, I think was perfect. Like I really wouldn't change it much. So I'm glad they made those changes specifically. Like episode 3 is probably my favorite episode of the season. So that overall, that one's like I'm all on board for. I think a lot of the story changes that start to get into the realm of I would have probably preferred what they originally planned was when we get to episode 4 and 5. But honestly, those first few ones, other than getting rid of Krista so early, which I'm not sure if you want to talk about that now, but there was original plans to have Krista actually stay along for a lot longer,
Yeah,
possibly the whole season.
Up on the hillside, they get together, they go on this journey. I have no clue what happened to the baby. Obviously, she's still out there in the universe.
that's something. Yeah, we can talk about that too because Krista was also something, and Omid too. I almost forgot about my boy Omid,
Hmm.
bro. He should have lasted way longer than he did. I thought his death was the worst part of episode 1. Like
Yeah.
he, you're telling me like of all people, Omid would just get killed like that? I don't know. I felt that felt very rushed to me. I definitely think that they wanted to do something else with him, but they just said we need to kill someone, and Omid's the only one who can do without killing Krista because Krista is still alive. I think according to the writers. So
Hmm.
or somebody said the Melissa, she was talking about
Hmm.
Krista, and Krista's fate is not dead, so she's not dead, but Omid was never supposed to die like that. It was definitely like a last minute thing from
Mm.
what I've seen, and I definitely think that was such a missed opportunity for him. But they had to be separated for that episode, so I just wonder how they would figure that out because Krista staying along, I just reading into that, I'm just wondering how they would get separated because if they don't get separated, then you have to make you have to make it so Krista and Clementine stay together. They meet up with the group, and that's how the season will kick off. So I'm not sure how you would get that together. But what do you
Hmm.
think they would do with Omid? Because do you think he would stay along, or they would have to kill him off anyway?
Yeah, so I think, there is a way. The only issue is when you have characters leaving, like getting split up and then constantly having reunions with the character again, like it probably story-wise would feel repetitive. Like we get the reunion with Kenny in episode 2. Like she's already reuniting with a character that she hasn't been with in a while. And then let's say she came across Krista in episode 3, and then she came across Omid episode 4. Like it would start to get repetitive for some people, but at the same time, I feel like you shouldn't just throw away characters if there is more to do with them. And for me, if you're realistically, it makes sense because Clementine never coming across Krista ever again in her entire life, that actually realistically makes sense. Like that happens. And I think a lot of movies sometimes or shows, they'll like try to force things to try to make the characters
Oh
meet
yeah,
back up. But sometimes realistically, like, yeah, they might never come across this person ever again. That's possible. But story-wise, when you get down to like the writing, you got to try to find some way because when you write this character in and then you just kind of have her disappear, it feels like a loose end that's just never tied up and it's going to bother fans no matter what. So I think there's got to be a way to get them together. And I think Wellington was the perfect way to do it. Like it's a big community. I'm sure she could come across a big community that's trying to actively get people to join them. She comes across there, and then she should have met up with Krista in season 3 or something. And I know they would have to completely rewrite what they do in season 3 and 4 to make that work, but I think it would have been better than just making her disappear for life. And then Omid, I mean, I was mostly okay with him dying, but at the same time, I do agree, like, there definitely could have done more with him. And I guess it could have been the exact same thing where he just goes off with Krista. I guess they get split up, and then we find them in a later season or something. So Clementine can still have her own storyline in season 2 with these new people, but she comes across them later on. But if they really want to do something really dark to start off the season, they could have done something actually, because they end up doing this off screen where Krista loses her baby. Now, I don't know if
Right.
they ever confirm it. I don't know if they confirm if it was a miscarriage or if the baby, like she gave birth and then the baby died. I don't remember if they ever
It was
actually confirmed
a,
that or not.
I think it was supposed to be a stillborn from what I
Stillborn.
saw. Yeah, stillborn.
So yeah, they could have done a scene like that. They could have done some intense sequence where there's walkers around like the same area. They could have had the same scene at the bathrooms where they had it before, but walkers are covering around them. She's given birth and she gives birth and then it's stillborn. Or it could have been something even worse where the baby is alive, but then somehow, gets lost and then the walkers get to it or something like that. Something really brutal to start off the season because Omi dying, I don't think was nearly as brutal as a baby dying, obviously, but it still would start off the season in the way that they wanted to, at least based on what they did. And I think that would be really interesting for the later parts of the season where Clementine is now delivering, or I guess she wasn't really delivering, I guess Kenny was, but she was there and they could have had her be a more active role in helping Rebecca deliver AJ. And then that being a successful birth, like the parallel between a successful birth versus the failed birth in the or beginning of the season, I think to me that would be an interesting parallel to make. So if they want to do something really brutal, I think that would have been a better direction. But with what they did, I was mostly okay with it. Just they should have had Krista return at the very least.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you bring that up because in the non-canon comics, they are not canon, but in the comics that take place after the final season, Clementine says that watching Rebecca give birth was traumatizing because of something in the past. So
Oh,
you could have easily written a way to see what happened to what happened to Krista's baby for
yeah,
episode 1, and you could have kept Omid for Wellington, as he really didn't need to die there, but
yeah,
to invoke the comics because there's probably like one fan out there for those who like that comic. Yeah, that she brings that up, and I find it interesting that she does because that's one of the few references that you can't really connect back to because we never really she doesn't see the birth. After she comes in,
mm,
she already gives birth. We have AJ, so she's probably referring to Krista's child, and that's something that
yeah,
we never got to see. That's the 16 months DLC that we never got. We never got to see what happened to her child, so if you want to make it dark, I completely agree. That's the perfect way to kick it off without killing off Omid because there was a ton of fans of him at the end of season 1, so there was no need to kill him off
mhm,
like that. But if you do, then having the baby is the way to start off season 2 to keep that dark theme they're going for without killing off a fan favorite character. So that's
exactly.
a good way as well. But that's a lot of the ways that the endings are different. Wellington, Krista, I think was gonna be there. Kenny was supposed to fight someone else. Kenny's character got a lot of changes. So I don't. Are you a Kenny fan?
Oh, he's one of my favorite fictional characters in history. Like straight up. I mean, I do think they could have done better things with this character, but I think he's such an interesting character. Like he's a hard ass. He's a bad person in some instances, but it makes him so interesting.
I completely agree as well. I love Kenny. He's like right up there with he's almost up there with Lee as one of my favorite characters in The Walking
Mhm.
Dead. So he's such an interesting character. And it's so interesting how he was rewritten like a million times for this season. So originally Kenny was actually supposed to be the very first script of the Walking Dead season 2, Kenny was going to be taking place as Carver's role, and Carver was never going to be a thing. So
Hmm.
that's pretty crazy because Kenny would have to, take leadership, and he would have to, be more ruthless, which we know he's capable of doing, and that would be completely changing his character. And I guess we can also just talk about Sarita being irrelevant, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, like, do you think Sarita fits in at all, or she can just?
Well, she's like what I call a pawn character, where she's really just there. I think there's a different actual word for it. I forget what the word is, but she's just there to develop Kenny's character. She doesn't really have much of a role herself, but she's literally just there to make, when she dies, Kenny become who he does, and then starts putting the blame on Clementine, which never really worked in my opinion, because I feel like, yeah, Kenny's very, very, ruthless in a lot of cases, but I didn't buy the fact that he would blame Clementine for that.
Yeah,
That always felt weird to me. They could have rewritten the scene to make it so it's actually more like, more likely to blame Clementine for it, like maybe something that actually Clementine is somewhat at fault for, but just completely making it like there's no reason why he would ever need to put the blame on her. It felt a little weird, but I don't at all think that direction would have worked at all to make him the villain. Just because I think what makes him such a great character, even in season one, was his complexity. The fact that he feels like at a certain times he does feel villainous. Like the way
yeah,
he's acting, like the fact that he kills Larry in that way. Sure, he had a reason for it, but it feels villainous to a lot of the other characters.
yeah,
But then at other points, you can tell he's doing it from a place of, he's trying to protect his family as much as possible. So just straight up turning it into a villain like Carver, where Carver is, somewhat complex, but he's not like he's in no way a good person. Like there's not a
yeah,
single part of Carver that I feel like could be attributed to being a good person. Whereas Kenny, he has lots of good traits. He is a good father. He is in some ways a decent person. He's just he's got anger issues. He's
yeah,
just a lot of PTSD, a lot of things that he's gone through that just makes him really like nonstop ruthless to certain characters. And it's really just seeing him try to overcome that, I think, is one of the best things about season two. And I know they wrote it to a point where he wasn't able to overcome that, but it leads to what happens with Jane in the end, where I think they should have completely done something different, which, as you said
yeah,
before, they did plan to do something different. It was supposed to be Kenny versus Luke, which I don't know how different the actual story there would have been, because I don't know if I'm sure you agree, like the conflict with Kenny and Jane there did feel a bit forced.
no,
Like it,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It definitely felt just another way to make Kenny look like a worse character. I feel like it was at the expense of his character because
yeah,
Kenny's kind of right in that situation, no matter how you look at it. If AJ died because of Jane, then he has every right to be angry. He just lost the only thing he cares about besides Clementine. So
yeah,
they're trying to make Kenny look bad at his character. So I think Kenny versus Luke is interesting. So there's a lot of subtle hints towards this as well. You're introduced to Luke first. He's the kind character of the group. And then in episode 2, you can sit with him or you can sit with Kenny. There's just a lot of little pushes towards that, and I think that that's really what they're going to go for. But then episode 4 happens, and that is by far the worst moment of that episode. I still get pissed thinking about it. It's Luke dies in one of the worst ways I've ever seen in the entire show or the
yep,
entire game, and it's absolutely mind-boggling that that's how they chose to take care of him because he and Bonnie go underwater for the same amount of time, and it's just yeah, yeah, that whole situation makes me angry. I really wish they did something more with the character because he was going to. He was surviving every episode, and then episode 5 was supposed to be his conflict with Kenny, but they don't interact too much anyway, so I'm not sure how that would work out. But there was definitely a push towards if you're friends with Kenny or if you're friends with Luke, and then the final episode you make that decision, and that's how episode 5 would end. So that's how they would conclude that with Kenny. But it's weird to think about because Luke got a really he got the short string of the hat, you could say. He got the worst he got the worst death, I think, in my opinion, but I'm
yeah.
not sure how you feel about his character.
I don't really know why they changed it, because I feel like you have a choice there with Clementine deciding whether she should shoot Kenny or let Kenny kill Jane. But you got two characters, one that we've seen since season 1, the very beginning. And obviously he's had some bad moments here or there, but like he still is a character we've seen for a long time. Versus a character who's relatively new. She came in episode 3, but she wasn't really there much. She really was more prominent episode 4 and then 5.
Yep.
So like having a very new character with Kenny here in the situation, especially for a situation that's very unclear as to what the hell even happened at first. And obviously once you learn that she was just trying to, you know, trying to fake that, AJ died. So
Yeah.
she can show that Kenny's a terrible person, which, yeah, again, feels really forced. But like that would have been a lot more of an interesting choice, I feel like, if you were to put it between Luke and Kenny and have it be an actual conflict between them, not Luke trying to trick him or something, just something that's actually like a dire situation. I don't know. I can't personally come up with it myself on the spot right now, but I do think there is something more interesting. It could have been involving Sarita even. Like I've thought about this before. Like you could have written it in a way where maybe Luke was the cause in some way of Sarita's death, and whether it was an accident or whatever, and maybe
Yeah.
Kenny didn't find out till later. That would be an actual reason for them to fight. And maybe you don't know about that right away, or perhaps you do know and you can see that Luke is definitely to blame. And then you have a more interesting choice here. And I think that could have actually worked. But the way they did it, it kind of just felt like, I mean, you were being lied to for sure as a player, because you had no idea what actually happened to AJ. And I
Yeah.
feel like once you make that choice, you realize that writing wise, it's always going to be better to just let Jane die, because I absolutely despise all the endings where Jane's still alive. I don't think any
Agree.
of them are interesting. So yeah, I definitely think they should have kept it as Kenny versus Luke. It obviously could have given Kenny and Luke, or it could have given Luke a better way to go out if he was the one to die there. And Jane, I don't know what they should have done with her character, to be honest, because she's decent. I like her character. She's fine. But like, I definitely think her purpose just felt like she was trying to replace the purpose that Luke already had prior. So like what was even the point of that? You could have just continued that with Luke. You could have
Yeah.
continued Luke like trying to mentor Clementine in different ways that kind of went against Kenny's character and therefore slowly led you to go against Kenny. Yeah, I think that could have been more interesting. But yeah, like we said, just wasn't the best the way they decided to go about it.
Yeah. With his character, especially, it's interesting to talk about Jane because Jane, I didn't see too much on it on how she was supposed to be. I definitely feel like she was kind of like the Lily. They're kind of trying to bring back Lily again. You know, the lone
Mm,
character who has like one person they
yeah.
care about, and then once they lose it, they lose their shit. And
Hmm.
her conflict with Kenny felt really forced. I absolutely do not like her ending at all.
Yeah.
And especially in season 3, right? Because in season 3, her ending with Clementine is like really unnecessary. Like
Yeah.
people don't like how Kenny died in season 3, but Jane's death is it's very I will
It's
say
yeah.
it's dark for sure, but it's so unnecessary, I feel. But season 3 is a
Mhm.
whole different animal altogether because any changes we make here, season 3 does not exist or it has to be rewritten because
Yeah.
yeah, Wellington, I actually heard if we want to continue on episode 5, was supposed to be in flames when you got there, or somebody
Mhm.
suggested it, but I saw people talking about how at the end once you got to Wellington, it would be closed like you see at the end of episode 5 anyways, but you could see like flames coming out, like
Mhm.
fire and stuff like that. And that I think that could be an interesting idea, have it
Yeah.
so you worked all that way. If you left Kenny behind and you got to Wellington, you would see absolutely destruction, and that would be a way to end it off dark. And then
Yeah.
season 3 could build off that. There was a lot of ways you could do with Wellington. I was never a fan of that ending. I'm not sure about how you feel about it, but I was never a fan of the Wellington ending. I felt like it was kind of cheap, especially how
Mhm.
season 3 made it so it doesn't even matter. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, Wellington was supposed to be a little bit different. It was definitely supposed to be a false hope, which I think is what they
Mhm.
were going for. So, what do you think about the Wellington ending? Do you think they should have gone with the
I
more ending?
emotionally, I like it a lot. I do think it is, uh, really well done in terms of just the dialogue between them, and it's the most emotional moment they get in the whole season. But I do think what, like you said, how they decide to go about it in season 3, it doesn't even really matter at that point. Most of these endings really don't matter. So it does kind of fall flat because of that. But when I do go back and play the end of season 2, I do really like specifically the one where she has to leave Kenny and then Kenny has to walk
Yeah.
off. I think it's a well done scene. But also realistically, I'm not 100% sure how much it makes sense because she does kind of talk about Edith, the lady at the gate. She kind of talks about how maybe in a few months we'll be accepting new members. So like I always wondered, like, couldn't Kenny just find like a nearby shack in the woods or something? Like, I don't know, and maybe nearby abandoned house and just hold up there, maybe make his own little fort there. And then he can literally just come back and forth and visit Clementine. Like, I don't, does he have to leave and walk off like completely? Like, I felt like he could have stayed around. You know what I mean? I don't know why he would just disappear completely.
Yeah.
And if you go with that ending in season 3, you never see Kenny again. And I actually made a video about this like years ago, talking about that idea that he could come back in season 4 because of that. If they decided, for some reason that if that one little decision, if that one little ending where Kenny's still alive, maybe he could miraculously come back at the end or something. But technically, he never dies in that ending. It's the one ending where
Yeah.
he literally never dies. And I always thought, like, why would he just walk off and like never return unless something happened, he got taken or something? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like they could have set up some sort of system, like, oh, I'll come see you every now and then. We'll meet each other. I'll bring you some food, or I don't know. Like, they could have done
Yeah.
something. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Something that I just thought of when you talked about him going back was that supposedly in the very first draft, not the dark ending draft, which was the second draft of the game, the very
Mhm.
first one, there were a lot of leaks talking about Kenny being like suicidal. But I don't think Kenny would do that. I feel like Kenny definitely, like you said, would set up fort near Wellington and just visit back and forth. I don't know why he has to die or if he has to go away. But I love Kenny, so I'd wish he would have stayed near Wellington or something. But
Yeah.
regardless of his character, was he definitely went through a lot of changes, and the ending reflects it. But I'm a day one Kenny fan, so seeing Kenny alive
Me
again
too.
would be great. And that
Yep.
also talks about season 4 as well, because in season four, of course, we know that Telltale went bankrupt midway through.
Hmm.
So maybe it's possible in the original season 4 we would have gone Kenny to come back instead of Lily, or we would have seen Lily and Kenny fight again the second time around. So
Yeah, that would have
th-
been sick.
yeah, that would have been interesting because I think I feel like Lily coming back was always going to happen. I think everybody knew she was going to come back, but the way she came back in season 4 is kind of, I don't know. I feel like she wasn't supposed to be a villain. I never hated her all that much.
Yeah.
So seeing her as a villain, I didn't really care for, but
Yeah.
that's the interesting thing to talk about is that season 4 obviously had the most development issues of the 4 games.
Mhm.
So, do you think these changes could have made a big difference into the final season, or if season 4 would be like, a game before season 5, season 6, etc.?
Yeah, especially if they didn't end up like if the ending with AJ dying, if that didn't end up happening. I mean, because the whole season is so reliant on Clementine's relationship with AJ. So if you were to take that out, you would definitely have something extremely different. Like especially if there was something where I don't know, Krista was still around or Omi was still around, and you had them together. You would definitely have to rewrite it because I think that season only really works because it's like all of these kids at this place. They're all kids, like all of them are relatively young, and so if you were to start throwing in adult characters in there, I feel like it wouldn't work as well. I feel like you just wouldn't do that storyline at all, and so I am happy with how season 4 turned out. Like honestly, I like all these seasons a decent amount. I think season 3 is definitely the weakest just because it first of all just doesn't really focus on Clementine that much at all. It doesn't really focus on the
Yeah.
storyline we're used to. And even the storyline they do have, I think, it's not the best. It has some moments though. I do like it for the most part. But I think season 2 by far is where there's like the most missed opportunities out of any season because there's so much potential there. Like I said, first 3 episodes I think are fantastic. And even though there's elements of 4 and 5 that I love, there are, yeah, like we talked about, there's so many little things that I just feel like if they just switched them up a little bit, could have set up season 3 and 4 to be a lot better. And yeah, I mean, overall, I'm happy with how it turned out. Like I do still like the whole
Yeah.
franchise, so I'm not gonna act like there was some magical thing that could have made it 1,000 times better. But there's definitely things that I think could have overall made those choices more interesting and the story more interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think season two had the most missed opportunities. There's so many like choices you can make that I just wish you could go, explore this opportunity. What if we cut off Pete's leg and he turned out kind of like Herschel in the TV show where he
Mhm.
survives a little bit. He's kind of a moral character. That would have been great because we never see
Yeah,
Herschel again in the games. And I really like Herschel in the TV show as well. So seeing
I agree.
like a wise older character survive like that would have been super interesting. Or even if he comes back with Carver and we see Pete and Carver, interact because he never interacts with him. A lot of interesting ideas that could have happened if you made these choices. And yeah, there's just so many behind the scenes things that could have happened. Ultimately, we got this. So that's really how I'd sum up season two. But I don't hate it. I still think season one is the best, like by a long shot. And then
Yeah,
season two, season three, season. I actually think it goes from season one to season two to season three to season four in terms of quality. But
interesting.
yeah, I used to not be a fan of season three, but if you treat it as an independent story, if you treat it as like a kind of like The Walking Dead Michonne, the side story kind of thing, if you treat it like that, I think it's a lot better because it's a story about his family trying to survive, and
Yeah.
Clementine just happens to be there. If you treat it independently, I think it's a lot better, but we're not here to debate on the quality because I know there's a lot of fans who don't like it and people who do. I'm in the
Mhm.
middle on that one. But yeah, that's a lot of what season two can be is just missed opportunities, choices that could have happened but didn't. And yeah, that's how much you would describe season two pretty much. So is there anything like missing from season two, do you think that should have been included, like an extra content or like I don't know, like the 16 months that we never got to see? Do you think that would have improved?
I would say the only thing I wanted out of well, other than what we've already talked about, that I think season 2 could have had, and yeah, you would have to rework some things and you would have to add in some storylines, but I really wanted the 400 Days characters to actually have a role other than just Bonnie, because I
Right.
like those characters. Like, when we played the 400 Days episode in season 1, like, I was under the impression these characters were gonna have some sort of impact on season 2, and really, ultimately, only Bonnie did. The other ones showed up, sort of, but they didn't really do much. But I think that would have been cool if those were actual characters, even if they all died, like even if they all had deaths later on, whatever. I would have at least liked to see them more. I mean, I guess you see Tavia a little bit in episode 3, and
Right.
we might see a couple of others just kind of like all around doing whatever. But if they were actual characters written into the story that had actual things to do and impacted our characters, whether they were villains or not, I would have much preferred that over them just kind of not doing anything. So I would have found a way to write those characters in, and because they really wanted to kill off so many characters, it felt like in season 2, and we felt like some of those characters probably should have stayed alive. You could have just used these characters for those deaths. If you wanted to kill off someone by falling into a lake or whatever, you could have just done that with, I don't know,
Yeah.
like Vince or something. Like, you could have just thrown a different character in there,
Yeah.
made it side character that no one really does cares too much about, but at least it allows them to do that death in a way that's a bit different. But yeah, I would definitely have done something else with them.
Yeah, I think the reason season two does this a lot is because if you episode four, Amid the Ruins, you can see Clementine putting on like she's obviously disguising herself as a walker, but I thought it
Yeah.
was like war paint she was putting on. That's what
Mhm.
some people read it as. And if that was the case, maybe there was gonna be like a war that was gonna happen, and that's where you'd see a lot of characters die. And that I think would have been really interesting to see because episode four killed off a ton of characters. So
Mhm.
yeah, what do you think about the war idea?
Yeah, there was definitely, especially episode 4, I think, had some of the most, like, ominous cut content. Like, the menu screen, like we were talking about with the blood on her face, there's actually other versions of it too that look even more fucked up. Like, it just looks
Yeah,
very different. And some of them also have different characters in the background. Like, I believe Eddie from
yeah,
400 Days is in the background in one of them, which implies that he was supposed to be in there, which I don't really know. Out of all the characters, I'm surprised he would be one to show up there. But I definitely think they were gonna do something very different. Like, I don't know if it was a war or some people were saying possibly like a cult of some sort that they were thrown into. I don't know
Yeah.
because like the whole blood on the face thing is definitely strange, but it probably just be Walker guts, like you were saying, like just putting Walker guts on the face. But um, it looks badass. I think it's the most badass art they had in that entire season. But I definitely think it implied that the season was going to be, the episode was going to be a lot different than it was.
Yeah, that's episode 4 is like the most ominous for that. And interesting you bring up Eddie because Eddie was going to be way more important and the 400 days mostly Wyatt I think was going to be the most important of the crew. So
Mm,
I really would have liked to see what they were going to do with that because he's obviously the one in the most covers. You could see him under the if you raise the brightness, you can see him multiple times. So
mm.
i- that's such an interesting thing that they also could have done. I wonder if they were just juggling with a bunch of ideas and ultimately couldn't land on one. Kind of like the Black Ops 4 behind the scenes. They were trying to do
Yeah.
chaos and ether, and ultimately we just got a mix of both. Maybe it's something like that. I'm trying to make more comparisons like that because Black Ops 4, behind the scenes development, but if we're
Yeah,
talking about The
definitely.
Walking Dead, yeah. Yeah, it's the behind the scenes development is always the most interesting part of it because there's so many cool ideas that just never went through. And the cult idea, I think, was supposed to be like the Whisperers or something, like the Saviors,
Hmm.
something like that. Maybe was supposed to come in, which we saw kind of in episode 4 or season 4 with
Yep.
what's his name, James, who's
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely delusional. But yeah, that's kind of our taste of that side of having a cult in there, and we of course never see it. So that's just completely missing content right out there. But it's episode 4 and 5, I think, that have the most missing ones here. Episodes 1, 2, like you said, 1, 2, and 3 are really good episodes. I'm a huge fan of episode 2. So seeing those episodes play out is fine. And then episode 3, you kind of get the idea there's something else supposed to be here. Episode 4 and 5, you can completely tell it's supposed to be rewritten entirely. So that's the darkest part of The Walking Dead season 2 was just never fully realized, which would have been cool to see. I think it would have been great to have just like a great dark era of The Walking Dead. But of course,
Mm.
Clementine is the best part of it. Clementine is as Lee describes it, Clementine is the best part of this world. So
Oh yeah.
having her as the only hope there with AJ would have been great. And yeah, that's a lot of all the dark stuff with season 2. Season 2 was such a darker tone, and then season 3 and 4 just kind of in between on that one. What do you think? Like season 3, 4 are kind of like more upbeat a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like, especially season four. I've Season three kind of reminds me of like almost like season seven of the Walking Dead main show for some reason. Like, because it's a much bigger world than what we're used to. Is a lot more communities. I mean, you have Prescott, you have Richmond. It's like these big communities, and there's this whole big faction, and they kind of feel like the saviors a bit, the new frontier. So I think it definitely doesn't have that darker feel that perhaps like we would have liked to have seen from season two. But even with what we got in season two, I do think that season does feel darker than season three and four. Obviously, with all the kids in season four, obviously that's going to feel more lighthearted. So overall, still happy with what we got, but I definitely think there was some more interesting directions I could have gone. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much just to wrap up. It's like season 2 could have been much darker. There are so many directions that could have happened, but just didn't for some reason. And there's dialogue that's just otherwise like with certain characters. Like with Luke, for some reason Luke doesn't like Mike, but he never says why. So I think that's because Mike was supposed to be I think he was supposed to be one of the people who were after Krista and Clem in the first episode.
Yeah, yeah, I did
Yeah.
see that. He was I think it was one of the characters was Ralph, and he was supposed to be the character named Ralph. So I don't know how that would have worked because why would Clementine still be around him? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they could have found a way, but yeah.
Yeah, and Luke doesn't trust him and never says why. Maybe that could have been part of the final episode as well. Have Luke reveal this, or have Kenny reveal this, and she's like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And then you have
Yeah.
Kenny be like, "Yeah, he lied to you about Krista," and yeah, that could have been a really good clash. So that's another piece of dialogue that's kind of like hinting at something more. But
Yeah.
that's pretty much a lot of what season 2 was. So, do you have any like final thoughts on the whole season? Because I know it's solid. It's still a solid season. I really enjoy it. but it's like it's screaming for something more that could have been
Yeah,
realized, and we never could have seen it.
I think it's one of those interesting things where to me it has like the highest highs of the whole Telltale The Walking Dead, which might sound surprising, but I do think it has some of my favorite moments, like individual scenes, individual pieces of dialogue, individual choices, like some of my favorite stuff. But then there's also all the problems. So like I think season one's way more consistently good. So I would always say season one's better. But like I can't lie, like, there's some moments like Kenny killing Carver, the whole speech Kenny gives to Clementine in episode 4, telling him about how it felt when he lost his eye. Like there are some scenes that are just so good that like it's always gonna be a season I love, even despite those flaws.
Yeah, and yeah, great way to basically put it. I think just there are the bits in there that are absolutely high, but season one just like every episode, I always love just playing through episode one, two,
Yeah.
4, 5. We don't talk about episode three. It's all great content. So that's pretty much all I have to say on there. So thank you for coming out here. I know you really enjoy The Walking
Yeah.
Dead, so that's why decided to ask you on here because the games are so much fun as well. So just talking about it, talking about the content is a ton of fun. So thank you
Yeah.
for being on
Thank
here.
you for having me. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so that's pretty much where we're gonna wrap up there. If you guys enjoyed having him on the channel, I will leave a link in the description, and I'll try to find that older video you were talking about and put that in the description as well because this is a very, very hot topic in the Walking Dead. So if you want to research more about it as well, just look up season two, cut content. You'll find a ton there. There's probably some stuff I even missed. We probably both missed it, so I'll leave some
Mhm.
research as well if you want to go look after that. But thank you guys so much for watching this long video. We are getting past the 47-minute mark here, so this is a long one. But thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, hit the like button, subscribe to his channel, subscribe to my channel, all of that. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.